Okay, now we're going to deal with exponents, simplifying expressions with exponents. So x to the fourth times x to the second. X to the fourth times x to the second. I'm going to circle these powers. So the operation's multiplication. Okay, here's how multiplication with exponents works. Okay, I'm going to write it down on a piece of scratch paper. I want you to write the same thing, but you're going to do it faster on the main paper. So x to the fourth means x times x times x times x. We don't know what x is. It's not our job to find what it is either. And then times x to the second. So that would be times and then x times x. So how many factors of x did we end up with? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's x to the sixth power. That's the answer. Now that's going to be a pain to write out every time. So here's a way you need to think about it. Okay. Make two lines. Okay, the first factor you have is x, and then you skip over the exponent. You'll worry about that later. And then the second factor we have is another x. Now don't write the factor twice, okay? If you've already got an x factor, just write it once. And all you do is write your 4 down and you plus your 2. So 4 plus 2 is 6. Now the second line is, can you figure out what x to the 6 is on a calculator? You can't, because you don't know what number x represents, and you don't need to find it. So x to the 6 is the simplified answer. Okay. So this is the same thing. Y to the 9th times y. Now one thing you need to know, okay, this y here is to the first power. You want to put that first power there. So the first factor is y. And the second factor is y. So I'm going to combine that into just one single factor of y by taking the 9 plus the 1, and that's 10. Okay, so y to the 10th. Do not times the exponents, okay? You add them. Even though the operation's multiplication, I showed you on this paper how that became x to the 6. See, if I multiply them, 4 times 2 is 8, genius, okay? So you want to add 4 and 2, 6. Okay, times and times. So our first factor is y. Our second factor is y. Don't write it again. And our third factor is y. So I just make one factor of y. So we have 3. This would be to the 1 plus 1 plus 3. 3 plus 1 plus 3 is 7. And then y to the 7th can't be simplified. That's the answer. Okay, next one, I've got a to the 4th power times a to the 3rd power times a to the 10th power. Okay, so we have base a, factor a, 4th power, plus a 3rd power, plus a 10th power. 4 plus 3 is 7, plus 10 is 17. So it's a to the 17th power. Okay, now here's the next thing we're going to look at. We have a parentheses, and inside the parentheses we have x to the 5th power and then to the 2nd power. So, here's how this is going to work. Here's how it works the long way. I'm going to write x to the 5th out twice, because this outside power is a 2. Then x to the 5th means x times x times x times x times x. That's 5 factors of x, times an additional 5 factors of x. So altogether that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 factors of x. So what can you do with, so that's your final answer, but what can you do right there with 5 and 2 to make 10? What operation can go with 5 and 2 to make 10? I don't think it's plus. 5 plus 2 is 7. I don't think it's minus. 5 minus 2 is 3. I don't think it's divide. 5 divided by 2 is a decimal. What's 5 times 2? I think it's 10. So, you got 2 exponents here. This is your only factor. Now, if that factor is in parentheses, I take its inside exponent times its outside. 5 times 2 is 10. That's your answer. Y, okay? 4 times 6, 24. Now, this next problem, we actually have 2 factors. 2 is the only exponent. Now, 5 and x would be a multiplication operation, okay? So now, you have a base of 5 times a base of x. That's how you need to write that. So, the factor of 5 is in parentheses. I put a first power, but when it's in parentheses, I got to take 1 times 2. 1 times 2 is 2. Then the x factor would be a first power, and 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, now, I don't just go write that, because you see 5 to the second power I can simplify because I take 5 times 5, and that's 25. So this here is replaced with 25, and then times the x to the second. Okay, my next one. So, circle your exponent, the power, you have a parentheses 7xy to the second power. Parentheses 7xy, then after the parentheses you have a second power. So 7 and x is times. You really need to put operators between your bases. X and y is times. So the first factor I have is a 7 times, and then that 7 is a 1, okay? 7 times x times y. Put that down first. Put all your factors down first. Then 7. 1 times 2, 2. With x, we need a power, so we automatically put a 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Y, you put a 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, so 7 to the second, I can simplify that. That's 7 times 7, and that equals 49. So this is replaced with 49. And then the x variable, that stays the same, and then the y variable, that stays the same, because when it's a letter you can't really do what you do with the 7. That's it. Okay, we're going to keep on rolling. Put your operators in. Circle, you have a, okay, let me read it so people on virtual can get it written down. You got a parentheses, then you have 10, then you have x to the 6th power, parentheses closed, and you have a second power, times x to the second. So now circle your exponents and just kind of ignore those for now, and then look at what you have. You got to know your operators. 10 and x, you need to put an operator between them. That's times. Then x and x, you have times. Okay? So it's all times. So if it's all times, you list out your factors. You have a factor of 10, a factor of x. Now, I write times, but don't write x twice. Do not repeat the same factor. Do not repeat the same factor. If you've already written x down, don't write it again. Don't repeat the same factor. So, that's all we're going to have. We're going to have 10 and x. Don't write x twice. Trust me on this. So I go factor by factor. First factor was a 10, so I put a 1. But it's in parentheses, so I have to take 1 times 2. So 1 times 2 is 2. Then x, 6, it's in parentheses, 6 times 2 is 12. Now, I have another x factor. So what I do is go to the x factor I've already written, and I write plus, and then 2. It's not in parentheses, so you don't need to multiply it. It's just 2. If it ain't in parentheses, you just put the exponent that's there. Okay, then 12 plus 2 is 14. Okay, again, do not write the same factor twice. Remember, we have a way of combining that all into one factor. So, this is what you have. 10 to the second, you can figure that out. That's 10 times 10, and that's 100. We can't figure out the x to the 14th, so I just put that behind. 100 times x to the 14th. Okay, next problem. We have a parentheses with 8m to the 4th, and the parentheses closes, and we have a second power multiplied by m to the 3rd. So, circle your exponents and know your operations. 8 and m is times, and then m and m. You see that dot there? That also means times. So the first factor is an 8, the next factor is an m, and the next factor is an m, but since I've already written m, I don't write it a second time because I'm going to be combining those m's into a single factor. Okay, 8 to the first, okay, it's in parentheses, so 1 times 2 is 2, 8 to the second. Then my next factor is m. It's to the fourth, but it's in parentheses, so 4 times 2 is 8. Then my next factor is m. It's a third. I just go to the other m factor and add 3. So 8 plus 3 is 11. Okay. So 8 to the second, I think we can simplify that. We can't simplify the m to the 11th. So 8 to the second is 8 times 8, and that's 64. So this is replaced with 64. And then times m to the 11th. Okay, next one. We have 6d to the second times parentheses 2d to the fifth, and then a fourth power outside the parentheses. So my powers are a 2, a 5, and a 4. Now I'll put some 1s in here in a bit, but first I got to put the operation signs. 6 in d means times. D and 2, there's a times dot there. 2 and d, there's times. Okay, you have 6 times d times 2 times d. We've already got d down, so don't write it a second time. So 6 is to the 1, but don't distribute it because it ain't in parentheses. You just write 1 down. The reason I'm not going with the rainbow and multiplying because it's not in a parentheses. Okay? And then d, the 2, that's not in parentheses either, so I just write 2 down. Then I go to my 2 factor, 1, but that one's in parentheses, so I take 1 times 4, and that's 4. Okay? And then d. Now, 5 times 4 is 20, so I just go to the d to the second and just add a 20. So 2 plus 20 then gives me 22. Okay, now you can figure out 2 of these now, 6 to the first and 6 to the fourth. So 6 to the first would just be a 6, and 2 to the fourth would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, and that equals 16. So this is replaced with just 6, cross it out, and this is replaced with its product of 16. And then times d to the 22nd. 6 times 16 is 96. Okay. You do need to times these two once you're done. Okay, now next one. So 20 and x, 20 times x times, remember all these are, oh sorry I didn't read it. You got a parentheses and then 20x to the third power, parentheses closes, and you have a second power, times x to the seventh power, and then it closes. I have a second power. So my powers are 3, 2, 7, and 2. So the factors, I have a 20 times an x, and then another x, so I don't write it down a second time. Okay, so 20 is to the first, okay, and you need to distribute 1 times 2, that's 2. Now the x factor, it's to the third, 3 times 2 is 6, okay. And then I have another x factor, so I just take 7 times 2, which is 14, okay. And I add the 14 to the x that I had the first time. So 6 plus 14 is 20. Okay, so out of these factors, I can simplify the 20 to the second, and that's it, okay. So 20 times 20 is 400. So replace that with 400. X to the 20 if you can't simplify. So 400 times x to the 20th power. Okay, next problem. We have a parentheses. Then we have 3x to the fifth, and then the parentheses has been closed, and we have a third power, times, and then we have a parentheses 2, x to the seventh power, parentheses is closed, and we have a second power. Okay, so 3 and x would be 3 times x. Remember, these are your powers, so they are not really operations. Power is an operation, but you don't put the dot between the x and the 5. X to the fifth power, you don't write a dot between. Then times 2, 2 and x. So you can circle the powers and you can just ignore them. So without the powers, I have 3 times x times 2 and then I've got another x, so I'm just not going to, I already have that. So the first factor is 3. 1 times 3 is 3. You put a 1 there and then take 1 times 3. Do not take 3 times 3. You have to multiply exponents, not, you can't multiply a base by the exponent. It doesn't work that way. Then x, okay, to the 5th, 5 times 3 then is 15. Now let's go to our 2. To the 1st, and then 1 times 2 is 2. Then we also have this x factor here. 7 times 2 is 14, so we go to the x that's already there and add 14. Okay, 15 plus 14 is 29. Okay, that's why you don't write x down twice, because if it's there twice, you're just going to have 2 exponents and add them. It'd be x to the 5 times 3, which is 15, plus 14. Okay, so 3 to the 3rd and 2 to the 2nd get simplified. And then 2 to the 2nd. So that's 27 and that's 4. Both of them are on top. Okay, so it's going to be 27 times 4. This becomes 27, this becomes 4, then that x times 29 is your trailer factor. 27 times 4 is 108. 108 times x to the 29th power. Okay, last problem in this video. You have a parentheses. In the parentheses you have 10n, and then a second power. Then you have a times dot. Then a parentheses 4n to the 3rd power. Parentheses closes to the 3rd power. Okay. 10n to the, and then second, 10n in parentheses, second power outside. 4n to the 3rd in parentheses, and there's a 3 outside. Okay, so here are my exponents. So the factors 10 and n is times, 4 and n is times. Okay. So you have a factor of 10 times a factor of n, and then times a factor of 4. Times a factor n, but we already got n, so we don't write it. Now, here's a way you can go, yeah, okay, I'll just keep with this video. Okay, 1. Okay, so 1 times 2 is 2, so it's 10 to the 2nd. Now, in parentheses, the n is to the 1. 1 times 2 is 2. Now go to the 4. 1 times 3 is 3. And then we have n to the 3rd. You can't ignore the n. You didn't write it down, but you can. Then when you're finding the exponents, you have to account for it. 3 times 3 is 9, but I just go to this n and add 9. So 2 plus 9 is 11. Okay. So 10 to the 2nd and 4 to the 3rd. Those are the ones you can simplify. So it's 10 times 10. And then 4 to the 3rd is 4 times 4 times 4. And that equals 64. So this is replaced with 100 times, and this is replaced with 64. And then times n to the 11th. But then don't forget to multiply the 2 simplified factors. Okay, those need to be multiplied. So it's 100 times 64, and that's 6,400 times n to the 11th.